how it all went south.
This is the story of 20-year-old Heather Elvis, who vanished in 2013 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A case that still has many unanswered questions, namely, where is Heather Elvis? We're going to look at how the investigation unfolded, how suspects were realized, and where the case currently stands. I'm Sean Kipe.
I'm Jason Hoke.
He's Jason Hoke, coming to you from 800 East Studios in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is how it all went south. This story is about a young girl named Heather Elvis, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. In 2013, she disappeared. And, you know, I'll tell you a funny story of how I even came across this. No one turned me on to this. It was, you know me, I'm a huge Elvis fan, so much so that his name's tattooed on my arm.
Yep.
And so my eyes are kind of trained at this point. Whenever I see the word Elvis on my computer screen, whatever, my eyes just kind of dart to it. Maybe it's that one thing I haven't read about Elvis at this point. And I did, and I just kind of like see Elvis, and it was some story posted about Heather Elvis somewhere, and I quickly realized, that this is not Elvis Presley. This is this young girl who vanished, and so I start looking into it, and I was like, this is a I want to say mind-boggling story in several ways. You have no idea, I don't even think, what this story's about.
I have no idea. I have no run up to this.
Typically in true crime, for me, like there's ways to find humor in anything, any situation. Sometimes you have to, and that's how you deal with things that are dark and grim and morose. And certainly, while there's an obvious aspect of this story that is not funny, that's not to be taken lightly, but there are things in this story that are so funny to me when you look at, and you'll see what I mean. Tell me when you recognize these points. So, without further ado, this is the story of Heather Elvis. Heather Rochelle Elvis was raised in Horry County, South Carolina, an attractive young woman, free-spirited, ambitious with a big personality. She loved art, volunteered at a local church daycare, and spent time in Costa Rica teaching children to read at an orphanage. So, sainthood incoming for that young girl. But makeup was her passion, and she was pursuing that as a career, studying cosmetology after graduating from St. James High School in 2011. While putting herself through school, she worked as a hostess at the Tilted Kilt Pub. You ever been to a Tilted Kilt?
I'm not allowed.
But you know what it is, though, right?
I do.
It's like the Celtic Hooters.
Yeah, it's like Twin Peaks.
Yeah. Is that what Twin Peaks is?
Yeah.
I've always wondered. I've never been in there.
Yeah.
Yet. that might be about to change. But she worked there and at the House of Blues, working her way through school, getting ready to, as I said, get down this road of trying to study cosmetology. In June of 2013, the Tilted Kilt employed 37-year-old Sidney Moorer. Sidney owned a small maintenance company and would regularly do odd jobs fixing things around the restaurant. Heather took an interest in Sidney immediately. In fact, she crushed on him hard. The two flirted often, and a type of relationship began to blossom, despite Heather being 17 years Sidney's junior, something that most likely made that whole thing a little more exciting for her, and I would say for him too. Sidney began stopping by the Tilted Kilts on his days off, sending her cute little love notes, telling her she was his whole world. I'm picturing him getting his receipt and little hearts and pink pen being written on it. Like, that's what I picture from that. Heather would relay all the juicy details of her new fling with her best friend and roommate, Brianna. And as most 20-year-old girls would do, she took to social media to tease what was happening in her private life without being too specific. However, she would tweet things like, quote, "I got a taste for older men. The guy who builds things at my job makes me want to cream myself. Hashtag wet dreams tonight." And one of these days, I'm going to drag that man into the mop closet and have my way with him.
I mean, I just don't understand how people put this stuff out. I mean,
A 20-year-old, girl dating a, guy almost twice her age. It's exciting. And I think that's,
wow.
I wouldn't put the stuff out there
Yeah,
like
that
that.
is.
But I was going to say, her
You,
strong suit is not, being vague or,
you may not know, but are those tweets still up there?
oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know they were. I saw screenshots of them. But what?
No, I'm just, these are, it's like a permanent record. Like, even if you think they're being deleted, they will live somewhere digitally forever. I have to tell my kids that all the time.
Well,
Even if there's a Snapchat that says it's 24 hours, it's being stored somewhere.
yeah. Well, and also, I mean, it was in newspapers and stuff that are still online. So all that stuff is
Yeah.
still, you can find it online. But things escalated in their relationship clearly because on July 12th of that year, she tweeted, "Baby did a bad thing. And I'm in way too deep, but watch me get deeper." She is really putting it out there. Like I think maybe it's an age thing or the time. This is 2013, which is not really that long ago, over a decade. But again, she's almost doing a play-by-play of what's going on in her private life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend doing that. And it did get deeper. Heather began to tell her sister that she and Sidney were in love and that they wanted a future together. So for Heather, at least, this had gone from a fling, some lived out sexual fantasy with an older man, to a real relationship. A relationship she no longer kept quiet about. She told everybody in her circle about Sidney, though Heather's friends didn't approve. They apparently thought she was confused about her feelings, and this wasn't love, but physical attraction. Her friends heard about this man, Sidney, but few of them had actually met him or really knew much about him. They didn't like that he was nearly 2 decades older than her. It seemed creepy and a bit cringy to them, honestly. But most of all, Heather's friends didn't care for Sidney because he was married. Of course he was.
Yeah. I was waiting for something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just the start, my friend.
Okay.
He had been married for 15 years. Sidney and his wife Tammy had children together. And I think just hearing that little fact of that her friends didn't really know who this guy was. She just talked about him. He's married. He's got kids. You kind of have a feeling of where this is going right off the top, don't you?
Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, you can find out pretty much anything about anyone these days. And if they are married or they're, those things, you may not been able to do as much research back then if her friends were curious about him too. If they were worried or they wanted to scope this guy out, maybe they were not able to find out.
Yeah. Well, for whatever reason, be it that Sidney was married or they just cooled off, the relationship that started in the summer of 2013 had ended by that September. Near the end of that month, Heather tweeted, "Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well." So many take that as the relationship was over at that point. You would think that's the end of it, but you'd be wrong. This is actually where things go south. No pun intended there. The following month, in October, Sidney's wife, Tammy, finds out about the affair somehow. And rightfully so. She's pissed. This is not the first affair that Sidney's had, as you can imagine. Of course it's not. He's, having an affair with the girl that works at Tilted Kilt, half his age, hasn't met her friends or family, Sure, he's done this before. Tammy makes Sidney call Heather while she's on the phone listening and break it off with her. Not only that, he verbally berates and belittles Heather, saying things like, "You were only there to spread your legs," stuff like that. Makes her feel terrible about herself as a human being, but Tammy clearly isn't satisfied. She wants to guarantee that her husband will not cheat on her again, and this is where the story completely goes off the rails. Like at this point, I think up to this point, you go, you know what, this is kind of a typical woman catches her husband midlife
Yeah.
crisis thing, cheating, messing around with a younger girl. She's upset. Obviously, they have kids.
It's like an episode of Cheaters, right? This
Yeah,
is where
yeah.
we're at
You've
right
been
now.
caught. Yeah, exactly. You've been caught. Some shame. You're buying diamond necklaces for a couple months to make up for it. That's not how this story ends. It just kind of this is the jumping off point. Tammy handcuffs Sidney to their bed at night so he can't leave to meet Heather. Not making this up. This is actually in police reports. She also changes the password on his phone to something only she knows, and she went everywhere with him every time he left the house. Everywhere he went, Tammy was there with him. Tammy made Sidney get a tattoo of her name on his stomach. And I've got to describe this to you. I saw a picture of this. I don't want you to think I'm talking about like this cute little cursive writing Tammy on the shoulder. You remember Tupac's Thug Life tattoo on the stomach? This literally, and it's in like the same font, like that old English, and it's curved in like 2.5, 3 inch letters above his belly button. Just like Thug Life, like it curves over his belly button and says Tammy.
So it's kind of like Tupac meets No Regrets.
No regrets. Yeah.
It's that.
No regrets.
Yeah.
Tammy takes things a step further still. She's not done and begins contacting Heather, texting things like, "Hey, sweetie, ready to meet the missus?" She threatens her physically, even implying that she's going to kill her husband. Heather seemingly ignored all of this, only replying once that you don't need to worry about me anymore. But crazy Tammy, still not finished. She called the Tilted Kilt regularly and even threatened that Sidney would no longer perform maintenance jobs as long as Heather was employed there. Heather lost hours, shifts, money as a result of this because she would get sent home when Tammy would flood the Tilted Kilt with calls.
So wait, Tammy handcuffs Sidney to their bed at home,
At night.
puts tattoos on, and yet he still shows up at work at the same place that Heather works at. Like, okay.
And I guess she would be like in the truck or
Oh.
I don't know. I mean, seriously, like this is all in court documents. This is all in police reports.
But not getting another job somewhere else. Like, that would be too easy. Moving away, stuff like that. No, you're going to work at the Tilted Kilt.
Yeah.
And you're going to like it.
And you're going to like it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to watch you through the front window.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. Some trust issues in this relationship, clearly. I don't recommend, by the way, staying in a relationship that one of you has to be chained in some way to any object at any point other than, like in the bedroom at night. If it's a trust issue that makes,
Well, he was chained in the bedroom, so everything was great.
yeah, but it wasn't for fun, And it's like, the other thing is like, Tammy's sound asleep. Old Sidney here's handcuffed to the bed frame. He's got to take a shit in the middle of the night. You got to wake. Think about this. This is real. He's got to wake Tammy up, honey. Number two. It's like he's got a cup next to the bed. I mean, this is
Puts the lotion on the skin.
oh Jesus, this is real, At some point, Sidney managed to get his phone back and began texting Heather again because why not? That just sounds like the best idea for Sidney. Start texting Heather again. They both agreed that their relationship was over, and we do know this from phone records, by the way. They did apparently see each other again at some point around this time, which was November 5th of that year. That day, Heather took to social media again, retweeting a joke which seemed to be referring to her affair with Sidney, which was, "Hey, married fellas, you can either cheat on your wife or murder her. Never both. That's when you get caught." And, you have to think, I know where this story is going and I know how it ends to some degree. You have to wonder with that. She literally is texting things in a veiled way, or tweeting things in like a
Like a
very,
passive aggressive.
yeah.
Now, what? Wait, were they back together, or was it something? Do you not know?
No, it sounds like they were, like the relationship was over at that point. They both agreed on it, but they were still, for some reason, texting again. That's not really clear. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would. It's not like at this point you're not going to go, you know what, let's be friends.
And by the way, we see each other at work all the time, but yeah, let's keep texting.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, my curfew,
Right.
the wife's expecting me back. On November 19th, 2013, Sydney and Tammy take their kids on a cross-country trip to Disneyland in California in an attempt to rekindle their relationship. And I'm wondering if he was handcuffed to the inside of the car.
I thought you were gonna say.
Disneyland. And I gotta
You're gonna say it like Adventureland.
And it's gonna take a lot more than a trip to Disneyland to fix that broken marriage. Jesus.
We're getting on the "It's a Small World After All" ride, and you're gonna like it.
Yeah, he's like, well, I don't have a choice. I'm handcuffed.
Exactly.
By the time they returned to South Carolina on December 11th, Heather had seemingly moved on from the relationship as well, at least according to those close to her. She'd gotten a job at a beauty parlor and was to start working there just before Christmas, which is, something she was excited about because this is what she was, going to school for. She was wanting to do that as a career and making those steps in the right direction. And I always look at every story. We call this show How It All Went South. And I think there's a moment in every situation, every story like this, where someone makes a decision that just forever changes not only their life, but the lives of the others, involved. And for me, it's right in here somewhere. Like she's kind of moved on. She's got her own thing. Tammy and, crazy Tammy and Sydney trying to work it out, take some time away. Clearly it doesn't work out that way. On December 17th, Heather went on a date with a man named Stephen Schiraldi. The two went to dinner and then drove around in his truck looking at Christmas lights in the nearby neighborhoods, ending at the Inlet Square Mall in Myrtle Beach, where Schiraldi taught Heather to drive stick shift in the parking lot. And no, that's not an innuendo.
I didn't say anything.
I saw the look. It wasn't an innuendo. Heather was having fun, texting her father and roommate Brianna, sending her pictures of her driving sticks, something she'd always wanted to learn how to do. So her dad was all excited and, my little girl's growing up kind of thing. Schiraldi dropped Heather off at the Carolina Forest Apartments where she lived between 1 and 1:15 a.m., and he's the last person known to see her alive. Shortly after arriving in her apartment, Heather gets a call from an unknown number, which was later found out to be from a payphone. She then calls Brianna at 1:44 a.m. and tells her that Sidney had called her, told her that he missed her, that he had left his wife, and asked if she would meet him. Now, I just talked about, there's a moment, there's one decision that changes everything.
Do you say yes or do you say no?
And this is it. This is the decision, I think, in it that just, and how could she have known? This decision changed everything. Brianna said Heather was crying and hysterical during the 2-minute conversation, and she advised her not to meet with Sidney. She told her to sleep on it and they'd talk more about it the next day, but that conversation would never take place, as no one has seen Heather Elvis after that call ended with her roommate. So we're going to go to a break, and we'll come back, and I'll tell you the rest of this. All right, so before the break, Jason, we were talking about Heather gets home from a date, 1:45 in the morning, and gets a phone call from this unknown number, which turns out to be a payphone, and she's very upset, calls her roommate Brianna, who's out of town, and it's Sidney, she says, asking for her to meet him, and he's left his wife and all this. Your thoughts? Is that call from him bullshit? Or with everything and just sort of the way this story is going already, me hearing that the first time sounds like that's a very odd, like I'm gonna call you at 2 a.m. I left my wife, meet up with me. I, you know,
After she's just been out with this other guy, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
she's been out with this other guy. She's had a great time, but then, as she's so excited about that, at 2 in the morning, she hears from Sydney.
yeah.
My question is like, so what do you where do you go? What do you do at that time of night? But also like, is this is the first time she's hearing that he's now left his wife Tammy.
Yeah.
So that's dramatic. And so where is she in all of this too is the other question I have. What's going on with her? So I've got three people that she's in her universe to me that speak to this. It's the guy she was on a date with, Sydney, and Sydney's now former wife, or still wife, but he's left. I don't know what's going on here.
Supposedly,
Yeah,
yeah,
I have no idea what's going on.
yeah. Well,
I don't see where this is going.
I would say, I would say that maybe on that cross country trip with his wife, Crazy Tammy, he probably came back and was like, "Yeah, I'm out." She's like, I could tolerate the handcuff to the bed and the
But 17
following
hours in the
work.
car too much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Driving from Myrtle Beach to L.A. or to California, I'm done. I could see that, but I don't think that's what happened. Clearly, on the evening of December 19th, Heather's green Dodge Intrepid was found at the Peachtree Landing boat ramp in Socastee. I think it's Socastee, some 8 miles from her apartment. After running the plates, police visited Heather's father, who was the car was registered in his name, and after questioning him, returned to the car together as he had a spare set of keys. The car was locked, but Heather's purse, ID, phone, and keys were missing. Repeated calls to her cell phone all went unanswered, and she hadn't shown to work at either of her jobs by that point. So right away, something's wrong there. That's not I passed out on my friend's couch. This has been a couple days, and
And she had talked to her friend, so
yeah,
it's not like nothing happened. There's a track
yeah,
with her friend Brianna, right?
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna and it sounds like when they left that call off, it was, should I go meet him? What do you think? And she's like, no, sleep on it. What are you doing? Like, this guy's just, you're probably had a couple drinks. Think about it.
Yeah.
You're gonna feel differently tomorrow. And I don't think there was probably a resolution on that phone at the end of that phone call. Heather was officially reported as a missing person by Horry County Police. And obviously, after they started speaking to people and trying to retrace her steps, investigators learned that she had been on a date with Stephen Schiraldi. But he was immediately cleared as a suspect after his mother confirmed that the two were together after he returned from his date with Heather. When investigators spoke with the staff at Tilted Kilt, however, it was the manager who first led them in the direction of Sidney Moorer. Heather's manager there was aware not only of the relationship between the two, but also had some other key information that we're going to come back to, that manager at the Tilted Kilt. By this time, police had obtained Heather's phone data records through her father, because Heather was still on that family plan, What they learned were Heather's last movements, calls and texts she made and received, and Heather's and this is really how police pieced together their timeline. They discovered that after calling her roommate Brianna, she calls back the payphone, but no one answered. That's at 2:30 a.m. Shortly after that call was placed, a ping shows her phone traveling to Longbeard's Bar and Grill nearby, where she stayed for approximately 15 minutes. So she hangs up with her roommate Brianna. A couple minutes go by. She calls back to this payphone. No answer. I don't even think she knew it was a payphone at that point, but calls back to that number. There's no answer. And then she leaves at 2:30 in the morning and drives, to this Longbeard's restaurant, sits basically in the parking lot for 15 minutes. She then appears to leave from there, travel roughly 4 miles away to the Augusta Plantation Drive, and then turns around, returns to Longbeard's, where she just left from, stays for another 15 minutes, and I imagine that place has got to be closed at this point.
So she's not made any other phone calls though,
No.
except that one to the payphone.
Yeah, that at this point, yeah, one to the.
But she doesn't have a call into Sydney, is what I'm saying. Like they're not coordinating to meet in that parking lot.
That I don't know.
Okay.
But there are calls that we know of to Sydney that are yet to be made.
Okay.
But it wasn't really clear. And that's a good question. I couldn't really, because you're thinking
You think
if,
she's just driving around like this may have been meeting points that they would have met before, and she just, I'm going to show up here, and
yeah,
if not here, then here, and
yeah.
if I can't talk to him, then this is where I'm going to go.
Yeah, I think so. Or on that phone call, that she got at whatever, a quarter or
Right.
two in the morning, meet me here or meet me at our spot.
Got it.
And it sounds like she goes there. He's not there, waits for 15 minutes,
Goes to another spot.
goes to another spot and then comes back.
Yeah.
So, and I think from the way her roommate described how she was, crying and really upset, I get the feeling that right now she's like frantic.
Hmm.
Going to this place, waiting for a couple minutes, then driving 4 miles away, turning around, going back, waiting more. You just kind of get this like frantic,
Yeah. Especially
upset.
the time of night.
Yeah, at that time of night, there's no reason you're out driving around like that in circles, basically. She then places a call to Sydney's phone, but there's no answer to his cell phone. So she heads back home, which is about 5 minutes away. And once home, she tries Sydney's phone again, this time resulting in a 4-minute conversation. There's no way, though, to tell who was on the other end of that call. So she calls Sydney's phone, and this is where I started to get the feeling that like there's a weird setup thing happening here between Tammy and Sydney. She called Sydney's phone, and there's this 4-minute call, but there's no proof that it was him she was speaking to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I wouldn't even think that if it wasn't for someone like Tammy's, her temperament already is batshit crazy.
Yeah.
So at 3:37 a.m., just minutes after that call ended with Sydney's phone, Heather's phone pings at the Peachtree Landing boat ramp. That's where her car ended up. She then attempts to reach Sidney again on his cell phone numerous times over a 2-minute period. And I think it was like 8 or 9 calls in a 2-minute period to his phone, all unanswered. One final unanswered call was placed at 3:41 a.m., and her phone goes offline from that point. Its location could only be identified as somewhere within the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, which the landing is technically inside of. It's isolated, it's fairly desolate, dark at night, kind of feels remote, And this is not a place for a 20-year-old pretty girl to be sitting in her car alone you're talking almost 4 a.m.
There's no one else out there. It's one thing to be by the all-night restaurant on the main strip, but this is not good if she's out in the middle of nowhere like that.
Well, yeah, and you clearly have to think that she is meeting.
Yeah.
Why would you go to this particular place? And it's a remote kind of, it's a boat launch.
Especially with the trauma of earlier in the night where there's just a lot of drama and back and forth, like you said, hysterics, and it's confusing, like why this call even happened, why she gets in the car to go see him, the fact that she's going back and forth to all these locations and somehow, hey, we landed here, this is going to be great. Or, like the kind of the worst place. It's like when you watch a Friday the 13th movie and like, I'm going to go take a walk in the woods in 3 a.m. Like, it's just not going to end well.
Yeah. Don't go there. Don't. Yeah, and all the unanswered calls, that many calls, she's either freaking out, crying, you think at this point, or she's extremely pissed. When's some time that you would just repeatedly call someone's phone when they're not answering? It's an emergency, you need to get a hold of them, or you're pissed.
What was interesting to me too is it felt like he had kind of initiated this back with her. She had moved on. She had this new, man that she was with. What makes her want to call this guy back 8 times after a traumatic couple minutes where she's been crying on the phone? I don't understand.
I don't think anybody...
Something else was probably going on there.
Yeah. Police begin to pull surveillance footage everywhere they can along Heather's path of travel that night. They learned that Sidney was the one who called her from the payphone the night she disappeared, which was verified by surveillance footage at a gas station across the street from the payphone. When he was questioned about calling Heather from the payphone, he claimed he hadn't spoken to her. that instead he had gone to Walmart that night, then went home and went to bed, where he was likely handcuffed, just like every other night, with only Tammy having the key. And this, when I tell you this is in the police report, this is where that comes from. When they said, hey, this is no shit. When the police said, hey, look, did you call her from a payphone? He goes, no, I couldn't have. I went to a Walmart and then I went home and I couldn't have left because I was handcuffed to the bed like every night. And only my wife, Tammy, has the key. This is where that comes from. This is what he told police.
This is the first time we're all hearing officially on the record about the handcuffs.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
So did they tell him that they had footage? I mean,
not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. They let him dig himself in a hole. When Sidney was confronted with the surveillance footage of him using the payphone at the exact time Heather received the call, he fessed up. He said, yeah, okay, I did call her, but it was only to tell her to leave me and my wife alone, and stop bothering me. What Sidney didn't know is that police already had Heather's phone records by that point, and they confirmed that she hadn't reached out to him since early November.
And he had called her that night.
From the payphone. Yeah, at least not until he called her. So here you have a guy who you just kind of feel him squirming down in his chair at this point. Like, did you do this? No. Well, what about this picture of you doing it? Oh, you mean that? Oh, yeah, that I did.
Walmart's open 24 hours.
Yeah, Walmart's
That's
open.
what I meant. I didn't tell you when.
Yeah. They now focus their investigation on Sidney and Tammy. The claim of going to Walmart around 1 a.m. the night Heather disappeared was verified, again, by security footage. He purchased a home pregnancy test and cigars, telling police he and Tammy were trying for another child. What a perfect situation to bring another kid into the world.
Sounds great.
Yeah. This might not have seemed out of the ordinary had it not been for what the manager at the Tilted Kilt shared with police previously. Remember I said we were going to come back to that. Heather had begun gaining weight around November, December. Coworkers even commented that she had gone up in size from an A-cup bra to a C-cup pretty rapidly. Heather had become concerned that she may have gotten pregnant by Sidney and even took a test of her own, which resulted in an error. So, he calls her. She takes a test, hasn't spoken to him in a while, comes up as an error. He calls her, that's starting to make a little more sense now. I have this feeling that she said, however that happened, look, I might be pregnant. I'm scared I'm pregnant. He's freaking out. Okay, meet me here. Now him and Tammy, are working something out. It gets more damning for Sid and Tammy from here. In addition to the Walmart and gas station footage, police obtained several pieces of footage from private residences and businesses along the travel route between Sidney's home and the Peachtree Landing boat ramp, which is only about 3 miles away. In footage from 2 separate cameras, they see Sidney's truck, a brand new dark-colored Ford F-150, travel from his home to the landing at 3:39 a.m., and then return heading back towards his house at 3:46 a.m. So, you're 5-6 minutes. Not very long at all. They couldn't make out the license plate or who was in the vehicle from that footage, but the Highway Patrol and the FBI did determine it was Sidney's truck. So the same, and if you think about the times here, the exact same time that Heather is frantically calling his phone and he's not answering, they were driving from his house to the landing, to the boat landing. And when they found her car there too, it's not like she pulled into a parking spot. She kind of pulled across several parking spots. That's why when police saw that car, they even investigated it in the first place.
Sticks out, yeah.
Yeah, what do you park like this for? And there's no one around. So that tells me she was meeting him there.
Yeah.
Clearly, right? Upon searching Sidney and Tammy's home and the new F-150, investigators find a newly installed GPS tracking system, presumably installed by Tammy to keep tabs on her scumbag husband, and it was in the car. So she had in the brand new truck was a GPS tracking system
that he wouldn't know about.
No, I'm sure he knew about it,
Oh, okay.
but it was, I think, just another Tammy keeping time. I mean,
Right.
this is like 8 different ways she's tracking, her husband's movements. But they find that it was manually disabled the night of Heather's disappearance. So I looked into these systems, and it's basically there's like a little SIM card, right? And if you pull it out, you have to go in and like how SIM cards are. You push it in, it
Mhm.
pops out, and it tells you it's like there are little lights and alarms and shit happening that's going, hey, you don't have a SIM card, your GPS isn't working. So it's not something that would accidentally happen. They took out the SIM card in the GPS system, drove to the landing, and came back 5 or 6 minutes later. So Sidney and Tammy Moore were arrested and charged with kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 charges of indecent exposure after an 11-hour search of their home was conducted. The indecent exposure charge was for taking sexually explicit pictures of themselves in public areas. um, yeah, there's that. The obstruction of justice charge for lying to police about the payphone call. In late February of 2014, police held a press conference and announced that they were charging Sidney and Tammy Moore with Heather Elvis's murder, even though a body had not been found. They claimed to have discovered evidence that led them to suspect Sidney and Tammy had kidnapped and murdered Heather, but they never released what that evidence was. Because at the bond here, you know, not at the bond hearing, but what's the press conference where they talk about this, right? I think they came out and said, we have evidence, we know it was them, we're not going to tell you what it is because it's an ongoing whatever. And I think that was to try to solicit a confession from them.
Hmm.
Does that sound
Yeah, because you don't know what cards the police hold at the time.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. After 11 months in jail, both posted $100,000 bonds and were released because at the bond hearing, prosecutors admitted that there was no direct link between Sidney and Tammy and Heather's murder. Tammy mainly took to Facebook groups complaining and claiming that Heather was, quote, a psycho whore who would not leave her husband and herself alone, which we know is a lie. So, yeah, that kind of we have evidence that thing that they were trying, it just seems didn't play out. They thought they were going to get a confession or that they would find Heather's body, they would find DNA evidence, and they didn't find any.
Isn't that strange that they're able to keep them in jail that whole time?
Well, they were arrested on other charges, remember?
Right, okay.
So, and the indecent exposure and all that, I think that who gives a shit, right? They knew that these people were involved in Heather's disappearance,
Yeah.
likely her murder. So I think they just whatever we can arrest you for.
Right. Yeah.
We want to keep you in as long as we can.
This is what happens.
The murder charges were eventually dropped in March of 2016, being dismissed without prejudice, which of course means that they could be charged again, right, if new evidence is found that links them to Heather's murder. The kidnapping charges were reduced to pending, and the indecent exposure charges were dropped because really, who cares at that point? In June 2016, Sidney went on trial for kidnapping, though that ended in a hung jury with only 2 jurors holding out. The following year, Sidney was tried for the obstruction of justice charge, which he did receive the maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. In 2018, Tammy was on trial for the kidnapping and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison for each charge, so she got 60 years. And finally, in 2019, Sidney is tried for kidnapping, and he as well is found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Both Sidney and Tammy have maintained their innocence. So, there's some justice there. I think just because a body has not been found doesn't mean that a murder didn't take place, right? They know from all of this other evidence, from the cell phone data, from the payphone calls, from seeing his truck leave and come back, the GPS in the truck being manually disabled, all these different things, and there's probably more, that we don't even know about. there's no way that they're not connected or involved in this girl's disappearance, right?
It's highly circumstantial. How long did she go? She went away for 60 years?
60.
Wow.
They've never found her body.
And they never actually saw either of them kidnap this girl.
No.
Wow.
No, there's no cameras at that landing, I guess. But I think that you have to make listen, you're not talking about 4 p.m. where it's like, no, look, man, yeah, I was on my way home from work, or I went to the store. You're talking about almost 4 in the morning, knowing that it's you. They did, the FBI and the state troopers and all that, they did confirm that it was his truck. They knew that he was going to that landing and going back, and that's the last place she was seen. And we know that they talked to her, or that she talked to somebody on the other end of his phone. So, it's like how
yeah, so like as we wrap this up, like what are you left with? What are the things that, like, as you've gone through this, what are the things that you think of that were either done right or wrong, or what are your own theories on what really happened?
I think it had, if I look at this, I think it was just I think it was a fun fling, and she was excited by that and probably didn't realize who she was getting involved with. And I think Tammy is the orchestrator, in my opinion, of everything. I mean, she seems like the one pulling the strings. And I laugh about it. And that's what I was saying. It's like there's some things in this story that are so funny, handcuffing your husband to the bed, all that shit. But on a serious note, that is crazy. You have to be mentally unbalanced to think that that's okay in your marriage. And for Sidney to be like, okay, that speaks to his level of like.
I think the biggest surprise for me, just in thinking about the whole story, is that it was both of them. That it was Sidney and Tammy. Like, the relationship was not good. Like, there was probably a pregnancy test that was shared. There was, this trip to Disneyland, and somehow the resolution is we're going to go in and do this together. Like, I did not expect that. I expected it was either Sidney or it was Tammy, but I did not expect both of them to run into trouble like they did and to face the charges and the convictions that they did, and being in prison. So, that is not the way I thought it would end.
Yeah, me either. And I think, again, I kind of feel like Tammy she obviously had just this control over, and I don't know, maybe Sidney is just a kind of dopey, dumb guy. I don't know. But she obviously had a way where she could make him do what she wanted, and even including murder. Because, I think the guy probably cared about, to some degree, Elvis, right? Otherwise he would have just been like, nah, really, I'm done.
It's surprising to me that because of their fraught relationship, Sidney and Tammy, that one of them wouldn't have kind of sold out and said, this is actually what happened, and I'm going to get the better time, a shorter sentence from jail. I'm surprised by that, because it's not like they were going to be lovers for life and that this was a dream relationship. You would think that one of them would have sold the other out, even though they were, quote unquote, married. It wasn't great.
That's the understatement of the day.
Yes. I mean, if you were handcuffed to the bed, this happened, and that woman who was doing that to you,
you would think that's your perfect out. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
Like, I'll get that.
And the other part here is, you said, she went missing in what year? It was 2013?
2013, yeah.
I mean, there's not much of a remedy on solving the case now, is there?
I mean, you've got to, and I don't mean to be morose in saying this, but like, you think about South Carolina and these places where there are marshes. I mean, look, I've family in South Carolina, in Myrtle Beach. And, my brother will tell me randomly that just alligators will crawl into the backyard. So a place like that, this sort of Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, you got to think there's alligators
Well, and it
And
feels very like of all the places to meet, it feels very intentional
yeah,
and very, like you said, morose. It feels
yeah,
like there was a reason that that place was picked,
yeah,
and you give all the reasons, right? It's swampland.
yeah.
It's
Dark, it's
it's
remote, it's
it's dark,
isolated.
yeah, and it's not easy to search in those areas too.
No, no, especially with wildlife like that. And I'll say, what are my feelings on this? Ladies, you can do better, and guys too, cheating on your wife, cheating on your family. I think like if there's a lesson to be learned here, things get bad in relationships and marriages. People have problems. That's human. But I think in ending a marriage, especially when there's kids involved, is never going to be easy. But if the alternative is murder, you know, you got to weigh your options there. Like that, there's a better way out.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Suck it up, be a man, and don't cheat on your wife and your kids in the first place. But if you're going to want to be in another relationship, just go do it. Break it off and leave murder out of the equation.
yeah,
That's Heather Elvis. This is how it all went south. That's it.
yeah. That's a wrap. We'll see you again.
See you next time, guys.